is at its heart and at its best an expression of all three of them, showing the intelligence to come together to solve problems, showing humanity in working for the best of values, and showing practical compassion by delivering aid, assistance, and hope to the most vulnerable. This institution belongs to all of us. Let us nurture it, invest more in it, and counter contempt for it. And let us all play our part in the other vital structures that bring us together regionally to do just what this United Nations does for the world as a whole. As a small nation at the crossroad of three continents, Malta just knows how important regional cooperation is. Last May, Malta celebrated its 20th anniversary as a member of the European Union, a living example of what can be achieved through solidarity and cooperation. And this year, Malta has taken up the chair of the OSCE, an organization whose mission is as vital as ever as tragically war and aggression have raised their ugly heads again in Europe. Just because solutions are hard to find, just because differences can seem dauntingly insurmountable, doesn't mean we should ever stop trying. Take climate change, an existential threat to each and every nation, each and every citizen of this planet. It is the very definition of an issue that can only be addressed by nations working together, whatever their other differences. President, to conclude, as Malta's term as an elected member of the Security Council is now drawing to a close, I once again thank all the members of the General Assembly for placing your trust in us. We never took it for granted and worked hard each and every day to repay it. And as we conclude our term, let me conclude my remarks with a conclusion reached over the past 2 years. I am convinced today more than ever that every member of this organization, regardless of size or wealth, has a role to play in the maintenance of international peace and security. We all have unique histories, unique experiences, unique ways of seeing things. But there is strength in this diversity. Together we can build bridges, overcome barriers, and address common challenges. Malta has tried to do just that over the past 2 years on the Security Council. Malta will always do just that as a proud and committed member of this United Nations. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Abela, for his statement. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Sir Keir Starmer, Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, President, and thank you to our briefers. I want to start by paying tribute to those who see these terrible conflicts and walk towards them with no agenda other than helping those in need. The UN and the ICRC have both lost staff this month in Gaza, Lebanon and Donetsk. More than 200 aid workers have been killed so far this year, including British citizens. Their humanity should illuminate the work of this Council. Because we have heard again today just how dire the situation has become. The Security Council must deliver its responsibility for global peace and security. So I want to use this meeting to call to action in 3 key areas. First, we need to renew the international consensus on delivering humanitarian support. This should be a bare minimum, yet too often we're falling short. We must address the situation in Gaza. The 7th of October was the bloodiest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. I utterly condemn the terrorist actions of Hamas. The ordeal of the hostages and their loved ones continues almost a year later. 6 of them were killed in cold blood just a few weeks ago. So I say again, let the hostages go. And we must face up to the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza that continues to deepen by the day. Israel must grant humanitarian access to civilians in line with its obligations under international humanitarian law. There can be no more excuses. Israel must open more crossings, allow vital life-saving aid to flow, and provide a safe environment for the UN and other humanitarian organisations to operate. The civilian suffering in Gaza is beyond belief. So we have restarted our funding to UNRWA. We're supporting UK Med to operate their field hospitals, and we're supporting UNICEF to deliver water, healthcare, and specialist treatment for malnourished children. But the most fundamental need is even more basic. They need the fighting to stop. The situation in Sudan also demands our urgent attention. Millions are facing emergency or famine conditions, exacerbated by deliberate attempts to prevent aid reaching those in need. This is now the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today, and the worst displacement crisis, with over 10 million people driven from their homes. It also risks destabilising South Sudan and Chad, which are already suffering their own humanitarian crisis. The UK has doubled its aid for the victims of this war to almost £100 million, but much more is needed. The world must step in. Second, I call on the Security Council to seek political solutions that can break repeated cycles of violence like that in the Middle East. The region is on the brink. We need an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Lebanese Hezbollah, and the implementation of a political plan which allows Israeli and Lebanese civilians to return to their homes to live in peace and security. That security will come through diplomacy, not escalation. There is no military solution here, nor is there a military-only solution to the conflict in Gaza. This Council must demand, again, an immediate, full and complete ceasefire in Gaza with the release of all the hostages. We need a political route to that agreement which provides a bridge to a better future, a credible and irreversible path towards a viable Palestinian state alongside a safe and secure state of Israel. That is the only way to provide security and justice for both Israelis and Palestinians. In June, the UK brought a resolution to this Council on the war in Sudan, calling for both parties to commit to a ceasefire. I repeat that call today. The warring parties must engage in ceasefire talks. We support the Secretary-General's envoy in his efforts towards peace. We must keep working to bring this war to an end, and we must ensure that those responsible for committing atrocities are held accountable. And this leads me to my third and final point. We must ensure accountability for those violating the UN Charter, and this Council must recommit to the values it sets out. Now, this should go without saying. Yet the greatest violation of the Charter in a generation has been committed by one of this Council's permanent members. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is illegal. It threatens global security. It's caused colossal human suffering. Over 35,000 civilians have been killed or injured, 6 million forced to flee, and almost 20,000 Ukrainian children forcefully deported, kidnapped, to put it bluntly. I think of Yaroslav Basilovich, whose wife and 3 daughters were killed earlier this month by a Russian strike on civilians in Lviv. And I wonder how Russia can show its face in this building. 600,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded in this war. And for what? The UN Charter, which they sit here to uphold, speaks of human dignity, not treating your own citizens as bits of meat to fling into the grinder. Russia's war has triggered a global energy crisis and a global food crisis, causing hunger in the Horn of Africa. They entered into a UN-brokered Black Sea grain deal. then withdrew. They tried to block the pact for the future. Now the world looks on as Russia deepens its military ties with the likes of North Korea and Iran. There can be no equivocation here. They must be held accountable. Aggression cannot pay. Borders cannot be redrawn by force. Russia started this illegal war. It must end it and get out of Ukraine. We stand with the 89 countries who made clear at the Swiss Peace Summit that Ukraine's territorial integrity must be the basis of any just and lasting peace. Any process that does not recognise this will only be used as a pretext by Russia to regroup and come again. President, in this moment of deepening conflict, the world looks to this Council more than ever to provide leadership for peace, preserve our collective security, and protect the most vulnerable. The United Kingdom will always play its full part in fulfilling that responsibility. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Sir Keir for his statement, and I'll give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Wang Yi, Member of the Political Bureau of the CPC Central Committee and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the People's Republic of China.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, dear colleagues, China welcomes the initiation by Slovenia as the Security Council presidency of convening this open debate, Leadership for Peace. I thank Prime Minister Golob for hosting the meeting. I listened carefully to the report by Mr. Secretary General, and I commend you, Mr. Secretary General, for all your efforts for world peace. President, since ancient times, peace has remained the deepest aspiration of the humanity. After 2 world wars and the Cold War that separated the East and the West, the commitment to peace has taken deeper root, and the pursuit of peace has become even stronger. However, the world today is far from tranquil, and there remains a long way to go in international peace. There is the protraction of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, the elevation and spillover of the Ukraine crisis, the resurgence of the Cold War mentality, and growing risks of division of the world. Global development faces difficulties, and emerging technologies are often abused. The United Nations carries the sincere aspiration of the people of the world to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, and carries a sacred mission to beat swords into plowshares. Sitting at the UN headquarters and facing changes unseen in a century, what should we humans do? Here's China's answer. For peace, we should follow the right vision on security. Vision should come before actions. Chinese President Xi Jinping has proposed the Global Security Initiative, which provides fundamental guidance to address security deficits and pursue lasting peace. And to that end, we must observe the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and respect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all countries. We must abandon Cold War mentality and zero-sum game and oppose group politics and bloc confrontation. And we must safeguard security in both traditional and non-traditional domains and work together to address new security challenges brought by AI, cyber, and digital advancement. At the same time, we should practice the vision of common, comprehensive, cooperative, and sustainable security and improve the global security governance system in light of the changing times. For peace, we should uphold international fairness and justice. Justice is a common pursuit of humans, and fairness lies in that all countries are equal regardless of their size. Countries should stand up straight against any hegemonism or power politics. We should practice true multilateralism, firmly safeguard the international order with international law as the center, and jointly discuss security governance on the basis of mutual respect, and build lasting peace on the basis of fairness and justice. It's important to uphold the authority of the Security Council, support the Security Council's central role in the collective security framework, and oppose any illegal unilateral sanctions not authorized by the Security Council. The question of Palestine is a wound in human conscience and a test to fairness and justice. The Security Council should bravely take its responsibilities and play an effective role. UNGA and Security Council resolutions on Palestine should be implemented, and Palestine should become a full UN member state. The top priority is to achieve permanent ceasefire and full withdrawal of the troops in Gaza, stop the humanitarian crisis in Lebanon, and prevent further expansion and escalation of the conflict. China calls for the implementation of the principle of Palestinian-led, Palestinian-owned, and Palestinian-ruled, and propose the convention of a more broad-based and more effective international peace conference. It's imperative to restart as early as possible the two-state solution and work toward a comprehensive, just, and sustainable solution to the Palestinian question. For peace, we should commit ourselves to political and diplomatic solutions. Throughout history, only diplomatic negotiations can lead to genuine peace, and only political settlement can make peace sustainable. The parties respect each other's justified concerns, seek common grounds while shelving differences, and meet each other halfway. It's important to increase input in preventative diplomacy and better leverage the UN peace-building architecture. The Security Council should give full play to the tools of mediation as granted by the UN Charter, and avoid wantonly using or threatening to use forcible measures such as sanctions. The international community should jointly create conditions and space for political settlement rather than sit idly by, let alone seek selfish gains. The Ukraine crisis is now in its third year, with growing risks of spillover and escalation. China's position has been consistent, that is, to promote talks for peace and political settlement of the crisis. China has issued a position paper on the political settlement of the Ukraine crisis, sent its special envoy for shuttle diplomacy, and has published with Brazil a 6-point common understanding. To pull more balanced, objective, rational voice, create the conditions for ceasefire, build the momentum for dialogue and negotiation, and make our effort to peace. And for peace, we should promote common and sustainable development. Peace and development have profound intrinsic connections. The majority of the hotspot issues on the Security Council's agenda take place in developing regions. It's important to support developing countries, in particular post-conflict countries, to realize independent development in ways suited to their national conditions and eradicate the root causes of conflicts. The international community should, on the premise of respecting the leading role of countries involved, provide help, constructive help, instead of interfering in countries' internal affairs under all kinds of pretexts, let alone imposing governance models. Just now, the Beijing summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation was successfully concluded, and President Xi Jinping announced 10 partnership actions for modernization, which will help achieve the vision of silencing the guns in Africa. Mr. President, on peace and security, China has the best track record as a major country in the world, and is the only major country to include the commitment to peaceful development in its constitution. The Chinese people have always held the belief that peace is the most precious and pursued common interests for all. 75 years since the founding of the People's Republic of China, we have stayed committed to a path of peaceful development. We never provoked a war, never started a proxy war, let alone occupied foreign land. Among the security P5, China is the largest contributor of peacekeepers and the second largest financial contributor to UN peacekeeping operations. China has been making its contributions to world peace through real actions. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence. For 70 years, the 5 principles have grown ever more relevant and have become open, inclusive, and universally applicable basic norms for international relations and principles of international law, making important contributions to peaceful coexistence among states and world peace and development. China is ready to work with all countries to champion the essence of the 5 principles and build a world that enjoys enduring peace and universal security. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Wang, for his statement. And now I give the floor to Her Excellency Mrs. Linda Thomas Greenfield, Permanent Representative of the United States and member of the President Biden's cabinet.
Thank you, Mr. President. Prime Minister Golob, thank you for convening this important open debate on leadership for peace and for Slovenia's efforts to strengthen the Security Council and the multilateral system. I welcome all of the leaders who have joined us here today. I also want to thank ICRC President Egger for her critical perspective as a humanitarian. I thank Secretary General Guterres here during the busiest of weeks for his leadership on the Pact for the Future, which will bolster the UN's ability to prevent and resolve conflict, and for the first time sets out parameters for Council reform. Last but definitely not least, I want to thank my dear friend and mentor, President Sirleaf, for being here as the representative of the elders. Colleagues, I believe we can learn so much from President Sirleaf's legacy of leadership and from the story of Liberia's path to peace, a story in which the United Nations played a critical role and where I had a front row seat witness as U.S. ambassador. After all, it was UN peacekeepers that helped secure the peace in Liberia following a long and bloody civil war. And it was Blue Helmets that facilitated the country's democratic elections in 2005, which brought President Sirleaf into office as the first woman elected to lead an African nation. UNMIL forces left the country in 2018, but peace and democracy have endured. And now Liberia is making its own contributions to peacekeeping missions across Africa. Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, let us look to Liberia as an example as we look for solutions to today's most pressing global challenges. And right now, there's no shortage of challenges. From the existential threat posed by the climate crisis to the spike in global food insecurity to the proliferation of devastating conflicts and crises in Ukraine, in Sudan, Haiti, and DRC, and of course in Israel, Gaza, and Lebanon. Colleagues, as President Biden said yesterday, since October 7th, the United States has been determined to prevent a wider war that engulfs the entire region. Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. And even as the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution to end the suffering in Gaza, to allow residents from both countries to return to their homes, to forge peace. It is possible. It has to be. As these crises have metastasized, some have come to see the United Nations and the broader multilateral system as, to put it bluntly, inept. And we've heard some of that today. I understand where that comes from. People have a right to be frustrated. Still, I believe to my core that the role of the United Nations in the world has never been more critical, more important. That our capacity for change is still possible. But there is a catch, and it's a big one. The United Nations can meet this moment if and only if it undergoes some real change itself. This will not be easy, but it is vital. As you heard President Biden say yesterday in the general debate, and I quote, "We must build a stronger, more effective, and more inclusive United Nations," unquote. That reform needs to happen across the UN system, including to this very body. And a few weeks ago, I announced 3 new Security Council reform commitments on behalf of the Biden-Harris administration. Our support for 2 permanent Security Council seats for Africa, a non-permanent seat for small island developing states, and text-based negotiations through the intergovernmental negotiations process so that we can move from talk to action. I also want to reiterate our support for permanent representation on the Council for countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as those countries we have long supported for permanent seats. The IGN session will kick off in the coming weeks, and we hope our announcement will spur others to renew their reform efforts and commit to text-based negotiations. Colleagues, as we move forward, reform forward, the fundamental principles guiding our efforts must be rooted in the principles of the UN Charter, including the full respect for international law and human rights, and sovereign equality and territorial integrity. Just yesterday, this council met to discuss Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, which has been a direct attack on the UN Charter's foundational values. Since launching its full-scale invasion, Russia has committed atrocity after atrocity. President Putin remains hell-bent on redrawing the borders of a sovereign country by force. But the Ukrainian people have not relented. They have stood strong. Colleagues, we must continue to stand together in the face of this attack on the UN Charter, just as we must reaffirm our commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other relevant international obligations and commitments. To that end, we cannot be silent as the Taliban attempts to erase Afghan women and girls from public life through archaic edicts, or as the Iranian regime responds to its people's demand for women life and freedom with repression and brutality. The UN must be a place that continues to advocate for women and girls in all of their diversity. Together, we must also do more, much more, to address dire humanitarian crises that disproportionately affect women and girls. That requires revitalizing what has become an overstretched humanitarian system. It is far past time for UN member states to engage a broader range of actors that can support a sustainable humanitarian system, capable of adapting and responding to rapidly changing demands. The private sector, non-traditional donors, IOs, and the MDBs have a critical role to play in this work. As the largest single country donor to the UN humanitarian system, the United States will continue to lead, but all countries must step up, especially those with the most means. Colleagues, the United States has continued to look for ways to improve the tools of peacekeeping and peace building and bolster our collective efforts to create missions that are fit for purpose. Peacekeeping operations create space for political solutions to advance, as we saw in Liberia. And we know that the only durable political solutions are those that are genuinely inclusive of opposition voices, as well as women, youth, and other systemically marginalized groups. Finally, I want to stress the United States' commitment to working with all member states to address the grave threat posed by terrorism, violence, and extremism, an issue on which historically the Security Council has been united. It is critical that we work together to develop counterterrorism-related resolutions, including sanctions resolutions, and the global counterterrorism strategy and its reviews. And let's be clear, counterterrorism efforts must be consistent with international law, with a whole-of-society approach that includes gender as a cross-cutting issue. Colleagues, I'm often asked which one issue keeps me up at night. What I always say is this: we can't afford to limit our attention to just one issue. We have to focus on, as President Sirleaf would often say, the priorities of the priorities. Ending protracted conflict must be at the top of our agenda. Advancing the fundamental freedoms of all must be at the top of our agenda. Making progress on all SDGs must be at the top of our agenda. Reforming this very institution must be at the top of our agenda. All issues of peace and security must be at the top of our agenda. At this moment of peril, the world's most vulnerable are counting on us. Let us act with urgency. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Her Excellency, Mrs. Thomas Greenfield, for her statement. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, Minister for Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad of Algeria.
أشكركم السيد الرئيس.
I thank you, Mr. President. I congratulate you for having chosen such an appropriate theme for this meeting, which sheds a light on the acute crisis